The whisper that shattered everything. I didn't cry at the funeral. Not because I wasn't hurting, but because something inside me had shattered long before the casket closed. My son Aaron was only 33. A heart attack, they said. No warning, no time to prepare. 1 minute, he was laughing with me in the kitchen, and the next, he was just gone. The ache hadn't even settled into my bones yet. When she leaned in, her voice soft and sharp like a razor, "You have a week to get out." I didn't turn around, I couldn't. I still had the funeral program in my lap, the ink smudged from the way my fingers clutched it, crushed edges, wrinkled, silence. The priest was still talking about closure, about peace, about finding comfort in faith. But I didn't hear a word after that whisper. It was like time had stopped moving, like air had turned too thick to breathe. Madison, my daughter-in-law, sat next to me in a fitted black dress, her eyes glistening, voice low, hand gently squeezing my shoulder like she was comforting me. But I knew better. I'd seen crocodile tears before. And now with my son, barely in the ground, she was already planning my removal, like I was old furniture that had overstayed its welcome. I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn and ask her how she could be so heartless on today of all days. But I didn't. I just sat there, stunned, frozen in that moment like I was buried alongside him. Aaron was my only child, the only soul on this earth who truly knew me, who cared. After my husband died, when Aaron was just a teenager, it had always been the two of us. Through college, his deployment, even his job loss a few years ago. When he and Madison bought this house, I'd helped with the down payment, not because I had to, but because I wanted to support them, support him. And now I was being told with the dirt barely settled on his grave that I needed to disappear. After the service, people whispered kind things about Madison. She's been so strong, such grace under pressure. Losing a husband at her age, just unimaginable. And I bit my tongue so hard it bled, because none of them knew, none of them saw the way her eyes darted when she lied, or how quickly she'd started erasing Aaron the moment he was gone. She walked through the crowd like a grieving widow on television, hugging people, making speeches, smiling through the pain. But I saw the way she glanced at me from across the room as if measuring how much longer I'd stay in the picture. I stood behind the kitchen island, silent, invisible, watching her take center stage while I stood in the shadow of my own child's memory. When the guests began leaving for the reception, she offered her arm to her grandmother and guided her to the car. She didn't look back at me, didn't offer me a ride. I stood alone by the curb until someone asked if I needed a lift. Back at the house, it hit me like a second wave of grief, but colder, emptier. I could smell Aaron's cologne still lingering in the air, clinging to the upholstery trapped in the corners of the hallway. And for a moment, I thought it might break me, that I'd finally collapse into the mourning I'd kept at bay. But I didn't. I stayed standing because I needed to understand what she was doing. She gave a toast, passed out wine, smiled with perfect timing, and when I walked upstairs to the room I'd been living in for the past 7 years, I knew something had changed. The door was open. The nightstand lamp was unplugged. My dresser drawers were half empty, and my jewelry box was gone. At first, I thought maybe a mistake had been made. That in her grief, or in an effort to clean something, had been moved unintentionally. But deep down, I already knew the truth. She was scrubbing me out. Quietly, systematically, with the kind of efficiency that only comes from planning. I walked down to the kitchen, past the wine glasses and empty plates. She was sitting at the dining table, legs crossed, swirling red wine in her glass, like she was already celebrating a win. She didn't even look up until I asked, "Did you move my things?" She smiled like we were discussing something trivial. "Just organizing. There's a moving company I can call. When you're ready." Polite professional? Predatory. I asked where my jewelry had gone. She said, "It was in the safe, just in case I hadn't asked for it to be moved." And then she said it. The line that made the ground tilt beneath my feet. Aaron and I talked about this. It's not personal, but it was personal. It was cruel and it was calculated. When I reminded her that this was my home, she smiled with a kind of smug pity. It was his home. That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay there in half a room, in half a house, next to a silence that used to be my son's voice. The blankets felt foreign, the walls too clean, the air too still. But I knew one thing for certain: she may have whispered war at a funeral. But she'd underestimated the strength of a grieving mother. She thought I was weak. She thought I'd fold quietly and leave without a sound. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The quiet disappearance of everything that mattered. Grief comes in waves. At least that's what people say when they don't know what to say. But grief for me didn't crash all at once. It slipped in through the smallest of cracks, hollowing me out in silence. It came when I walked down the stairs and noticed Aaron's favorite photo by the staircase was gone. No one said anything about it. No one even looked. But I noticed, and I kept noticing. The first few days after the funeral passed like a blur. People came and went. Madison was gracious, even radiant, smiling for guests, organizing meals, arranging flower vases like a professional hostess. But underneath that polished exterior, something darker was moving, something deliberate. She handed out wine glasses, like it was a holiday gathering instead of a mourning period. She stood near the fireplace and gave a small speech about Aaron's strength, his humor, his love for family. Her voice cracked at all the right places, and the guests nodded with soft sympathy, placing their hands over their hearts as if they understood. But they didn't. Not really. No one noticed the military medal case missing from the shelf. No one realized the recliner he sat in every evening had been replaced with a sleek modern chair that still had a price tag tucked underneath. No one asked where his fishing gear went or why his books were no longer lining the study shelves. But I noticed every missing object felt like a wound, fresh and strategic. She wasn't just mourning him, she was erasing him. And in the process, she was erasing me too. The room I'd lived in for 7 years had changed overnight. At first, I thought maybe the maid had folded my blankets and unplugged my lamp to tidy up. But when I opened the dresser drawers and found half of them empty, something inside me turned cold. My jewelry box was gone. My cash envelope vanished. The closet had boxes labeled "Mom's Stuff," stacked neatly in the corner like they were ready for pickup. I hadn't packed them. I hadn't given permission. And no one had asked. I stood in that doorway staring at the neat rows of sealed cardboard. And for a moment, I felt like a ghost in my own home. The home I'd helped Aaron and Madison purchase. The home I had contributed to with my own money when Aaron lost his job and didn't want to move out of state. The home where I cooked every holiday meal, where I stayed up waiting when he worked late. Where I hugged him every morning before he left for his shift. But to her, I was an inconvenience. A remnant of his past. A shadow she wanted to vanish. Later that evening, I walked through the kitchen on quiet feet. Madison was sitting at the dining table with a glass of wine, flipping through her phone, smiling faintly at something I couldn't see. She didn't acknowledge me until I cleared my throat. "Did you move my things?" She looked up slowly, like she'd forgotten I existed. "I was just organizing," she said, her voice light. "There's a moving company I can call when you're ready." My jaw tensed. I asked her where my jewelry had gone. She swirled the wine in her glass and said, "Some of it's in the safe. You wouldn't want to lose anything while people are in and out." I didn't ask her to put anything in the safe. I didn't authorize her to touch a single thing. She added casually, Aaron and I talked about this. It's not personal. We just assumed you'd want to go back to your sisters. I don't have a sister." She knew that. The audacity wasn't just in her words. It was in the calm, rehearsed way she delivered them, like this was part of some carefully outlined plan. One she assumed I'd go along with quietly and broken. I told her, "This is my home." She smiled without warmth. It was his home. He would have wanted us to have space to grieve. That word rang louder than anything else in the room. I realized then that to her, Aaron was no longer a person. He was a name she could wield, a shield to hide behind, a justification for every cruel decision she was making in his absence. She picked up her phone again, dismissing me as if I were interrupting her day, and I walked back to my room without another word, afraid that if I spoke again, my anger would boil over. I was raised to be composed. But inside, I was already fighting to keep my hands from shaking. I opened the closet and found a bin labeled Old Docs. I pulled it down, heart pounding, and started searching receipts, old warranties, unimportant mail. Then I found it a folder with my bank statements, my medical records, and my passport. But the deed, the original deed that Aaron and I signed together, was gone. That was the first moment I felt truly afraid. This wasn't just emotional cruelty anymore. It was a calculated removal, a cleansing of history. And she was counting on me being too lost in grief to realize what she was doing. She didn't understand that I might be grieving, but I was still watching, still thinking, still remembering everything. Grief, after all, doesn't make you weak. It makes you dangerous. Because once you've lost everything, there's nothing left to fear. That night, I didn't sleep. I checked every drawer, every envelope, every file folder in that house. I made lists of what was missing. I wrote down what I remembered being, where I took photos. I scanned documents. I didn't confront her yet, because the most dangerous weapon in a battle like this isn't rage. It's silence, patience, precision. She thought she had already won, but I was only just beginning to understand the game she was playing, and I was ready to play it better. When the paper vanishes, the truth begins. They say, grief clouds the mind. But for me, it cleared everything. After discovering that my room had been silently packed and labeled like an estate sale, I started to understand Madison wasn't reacting to loss. She was executing a plan, and with each drawer emptied, each personal item stashed away, my fear slowly started to turn into something colder, focused. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, in the room she'd tried to erase me from. I pulled out the box I kept beneath the bed, my private file of records notes, and the one thing that made me feel safe in that house, the deed. The physical proof that I wasn't just some guest passing through, but a legal part of the home Aaron and I had built. My name had been on it since day one, ever since I helped them cover the down payment when Aaron got laid off and didn't want to delay their first home, but the deed wasn't there. I froze. I went through the box again. Papers, receipts, insurance, documents, tax folders. But the manila envelope labeled home ownership, final deed, was missing. I checked twice. 3 times. I emptied everything out onto the floor. My fingers were trembling by the end, and not because of the cold. It was something else now, something deeper. A realization that maybe Madison hadn't just moved things around to organize. Maybe she'd taken that document on purpose. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was filed somewhere else. Maybe Aaron had moved it. But my gut knew better. I hadn't seen Madison cry alone. I hadn't seen her falter. All I'd seen since the funeral was controlled. Silence, perfectly timed expressions, and one missing document after another. The picture frames, the medals, the chair, now the deed. She was building a new version of the house, one that didn't include him or me. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I couldn't sleep, not with my mind spinning through memories and possibilities. I sat at the kitchen table as daylight crept in. The scent of coffee was already gone. Madison must have brewed it before I got up. She sat there typing on her laptop with all the calmness in the world, like it was any other weekday. She didn't even look up when she said, "Morning. Just checking a few quotes for movers." My voice was flat. I didn't ask for movers. She kept typing. "Right? But you said you wanted to handle things on your own timeline?" I figured it might help. That's how she did it. Every move she made came dressed in politeness. Every push toward the door wrapped in silk. But I wasn't going to let her sugarcoat my erasure. Not anymore. I walked into the living room, hoping for some sense of familiarity. Aaron's recliner gone, replaced by some fake leather monstrosity that looked like it belonged in a waiting room. His favorite blanket, the one he always threw over his legs in the winter, was shoved behind the TV stand like it was a forgotten dog toy. "Where's Aaron's chair?" I asked. She shrugged like it meant nothing. It was old. Didn't fit the room anymore. "It's been a week." She looked up from her laptop, annoyed. "It's been 9 days. I'm not going to sit in a dead man's chair." Ellen. That was the first time she said his name aloud since the funeral. Like it was just a name now, not a person. Not my son. I stepped outside for air. My hands were shaking again, but not from helplessness. This time, it was rage and strategy, because if Madison had removed the deed, she was preparing to make a legal move. And if she believed I didn't have proof of ownership, then she'd assume I was defenseless. But I wasn't. When Aaron and I last updated our wills, he'd recommended a lawyer, Mr. Holt. I still had his number in my phone. I called that morning, asked to see him. His secretary said he could take me that afternoon. I didn't tell Madison. I didn't owe her that. When I walked into Mr. Holt's office, I felt like I was finally stepping back into the light after weeks in the dark. He remembered Aaron instantly. Solid guy. He said, "I'm sorry." I told him everything. Madison's sudden push to evict me, the missing documents, the erased belongings, the disappearance of the deed. He listened carefully, hands folded. Then he asked, "Do you have any record of contributing to the down payment?" "Yes," I said. "I used a cashier's check. I still have the receipt." His eyes lit up. "Then we may have something." I leaned forward. "What exactly do you mean?" He explained that if my name was on the deed and I could prove financial contribution, I had rights, strong ones. Madison couldn't just force me out, not legally, and if the deed had simply been relocated rather than destroyed, there was still a paper trail, a record of ownership, a way to fight back. He told me to find the cashier's check receipt, and if possible, the original purchase documents. I nodded, thanked him, and drove home with my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. When I pulled into the driveway, Madison was on the phone pacing near the side of the house. I heard her say, "No, she doesn't know anything. It's handled." Her voice dropped when she saw me, but she didn't hang up. I walked past her without a word. Straight to the attic. Aaron had stored everything up there, boxes from before they were married, paperwork, old electronics, dust filled the air as I climbed. I coughed, opened box after box, heart pounding. Then I saw it, a bin labeled Home Purchase. I dropped to my knees and pulled it out. I dug through closing statements, insurance paperwork, loan approvals, and there it was. A manila envelope marked in Aaron's handwriting. Final deed. I opened it with shaking hands. My name, my signature, his dated notarized, filed. A quiet flood of emotion washed over me. Not grief, not anger, just a strange calm. The kind that comes when the fear fades and something sharper takes its place. Madison had been bluffing. Either she didn't know the deed still existed, or she knew and hoped I didn't. She underestimated me, but she wouldn't make that mistake again. The moment, everything changed. When I found the deed, everything shifted. Up until that point, I had been moving through fog, staggering between grief and confusion, clinging to silence, while Madison quietly dismantled everything I held dear. But holding that manila envelope in my hands, up there in the dusty attic surrounded by forgotten boxes and air that smelled like old paper and loss, I felt something return to me. Control the deed wasn't just paper. It was proof. It was a weapon in a war I hadn't chosen but could no longer avoid. My name was there, clearly typed, cleanly signed and sealed in ink and notarization. It was dated, filed, and real. And suddenly, Madison's smug little smiles, her veiled comments, her carefully calculated erasure, they all began to crack under the weight of this one undeniable truth. I belonged here, legally, historically, personally. When I climbed down the attic ladder, the envelope tucked securely in my coat. Madison was waiting at the bottom. She looked up with an expression I now knew well, pretend innocence, laced with quiet threat. Looking for something, she asked, her eyebrows raised, just enough to hint she knew exactly what I had been after. I stared her straight in the eye and said, "Just some old paperwork. Nothing important." She smiled tightly, the kind of smile that comes from someone who's no longer sure she holds all the cards. "That's good," she said softly. "I wouldn't want you to get stressed." And then she walked off heels, clicking gently across the hardwood, like we hadn't just had a silent standoff at the edge of a battlefield. That night, I didn't sleep. But for the first time since the funeral, it wasn't from fear. It was from planning. I made copies of the deed, scanned it into my email, created a folder labeled, "For Lawyer Only." I even sent a backup to a trusted friend out of state, just in case I wasn't about to be outmaneuvered again. Madison, however, was still playing her game. Around 9 p.m., she appeared in the living room with 2 glasses of wine. "I figured we should talk," she said, "clear the air." I took the glass, but I didn't drink. I simply said, "Okay." She settled on the couch across from me, posture composed, voice rehearsed. "I know things have been tense," she began, "but Aaron always said this house was for us, for our future family." I said nothing. I watched her hands, her ring finger, still wearing his wedding band like a trophy she didn't earn. She looked down at her glass. "I don't want things to get ugly. I just want to move forward." Then she looked up and delivered her line like it was scripted. "You understand, right?" That was the moment I shifted the balance. "Have you spoken to a lawyer?" I asked. Her face twitched. "No, I didn't think it was necessary," she said too quickly. I smiled. "Maybe it is." There it was, that flicker in her eyes, panic masked by irritation. She was starting to realize I wasn't going to roll over. She stood up slowly, her smile fading. "I hope we can do this the easy way." I nodded. "So do I." And she walked out, but what she didn't know was that I had already been playing the long game earlier that day, while she paced the hallway, whispering on the phone. I had overheard her say, "She's still here." "Yeah, I know it's awkward, but she doesn't have any real claim." Then a pause. "No, her name's not on any of the utility bills or tax records. It'll be fine." She was wrong. She didn't know what I had just pulled from that attic. She didn't know that I had photos of the refinance documents too. Documents signed within the past year, listing Aaron and me, and no mention of her documents that proved she had never legally been added to the property, not even after the refinance. And I made sure to back those up as well. Every time she spoke, I listened. Every time she moved, I watched. I was done reacting. Now I was collecting. The next morning, she played her next hand. A manila envelope slid under my door, labeled urgent, 48-hour notice. Inside was a typed document unfiled and unsigned by any court, just a thinly veiled threat of eviction. It claimed I was emotionally unstable. that I had made verbal threats, that I was unfit to remain in the home due to ongoing psychological behavior. It even included one line at the bottom that made my blood turn to ice. Failure to vacate will result in law enforcement involvement and potential elder neglect claims. She was trying to flip the narrative, make me look like a threat, a danger, an unstable old woman who could be quietly removed with legal jargon and courtroom theater. But what she didn't expect was that I'd kept every document, every piece of evidence, and more importantly, that I had already handed most of it to my lawyer. I folded her fake eviction notice, slid it into my growing folder labeled Madison, and drove straight to Mr. Holt's office. No appointment, no warning. I just showed up. He read the notice. He laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. "She's threatening elder neglect," he asked, "while she's the one manipulating you emotionally, financially, and legally." I nodded. "She's trying to bait me." He nodded back. "Then don't take the bait. You've already won half this battle without saying a word." We discussed next steps, formal filing evidence, compilation, discovery, protocol court options. For the first time since Aaron died, I felt like I wasn't surviving anymore. I was planning. That night, I came home and walked into a room Madison had tried to empty me out of. I wasn't scared. I wasn't rattled. I was still focused. She didn't know yet, but her power was slipping, and I was just getting started. Silence is a weapon when you know the law is on your side. There's a difference between being powerless and being quiet. Madison still hadn't figured that out. She thought silence meant surrender, that my calm was cowardice, that my stillness was defeat. But I had learned something over those sleepless nights, sitting in a house that no longer smelled like Aaron's cologne, where every memory had been boxed and pushed to the attic. Silence, when backed by preparation, is the most dangerous thing a person can wield, because it means you're watching, calculating. And when the moment comes, you'll strike with something she never saw. Coming truth. After I handed Mr. Holt the forged eviction notice and showed him the scanned deed, the refinance papers, and the photos of Madison's late-night backup folders, he leaned back in his chair and gave me a look I hadn't seen since the day Aaron was born. A look that said, "You're not alone in this anymore. She has no legal standing," he told me. "Her name appears nowhere. You've been here over 7 years. You've contributed financially. And if we need to show emotional harassment, we've got more than enough to raise serious questions." I sat there, not triumphant, but steady, like I was finally standing on ground that wasn't shifting beneath me. "What do I do now?" I asked. He paused, then said, "Now we prepare to go on offense." We started drafting what he called a notice of shared ownership, a legal statement that would prevent her from filing another fake eviction or attempting to sell or refinance the house without my consent. He also created a preemptive legal response to any future claim she might try to push through the court, forged or not. And then he gave me the most important advice I'd heard since this all began. Keep your documents safe and stay calm. The second you react emotionally, you'll lose ground. That phrase repeated in my head for the next several days like a mantra, because Madison didn't just want the house. She wanted the story. She wanted to frame herself as the misunderstood widow, the woman cornered by an emotionally unstable mother-in-law. She wanted the courtroom, the community, and maybe even the media to believe she was the victim of someone who wouldn't let go. But I wasn't going to give her that story. When I came home from Holt's office that day, I found her in the garage tossing Aaron's old fishing gear into a bin labeled "Donate." She looked up casually, as if we were just two women decluttering on a weekend. "Just getting rid of junk," she said lightly. "Hope that's okay." I didn't respond. I didn't react. I just walked past her, like she didn't exist because in my mind, she didn't anymore. She wasn't a partner to my son. She wasn't family. She was a legal opponent in a very real war. And opponents don't get pleasantries. They get strategy. Back in my room, I found the top drawer of my nightstand locked. It had never had a lock. I pried it open with a flathead screwdriver. Inside the prescription bottle I kept for my anxiety was gone. So was the small cash envelope I tucked away in case of emergencies. I didn't panic. I documented. Then I went into Erin's office. Another place she hadn't touched much. I opened the filing cabinet. Third drawer down. Inside was a folder labeled Refinance Options. And in it, dated just 10 months before his death, was a new mortgage agreement with only 2 names, mine and Erin's, no Madison. I took photos, backed them up, and smiled for the first time in days. And just when I thought the house had gone quiet, I heard Madison's voice floating down the hallway, crisp and careless. "Yeah, she's still here," she said on speakerphone. "It's awkward, but she doesn't have any real claim. Her name's not on the utilities or taxes. It'll be fine." I didn't even bother hiding the sound of my footsteps this time. I made sure she knew I heard. She turned fast. "Everything okay?" she asked, voice syrupy, sweet. I looked her dead in the eye. "You really should be careful what you say in this house." "The walls are thin," she blinked. Just once. But that was all I needed from that point forward. She stopped trying to provoke me directly. But her tactics shifted. She made snide comments about how a baby needs space. She dropped hints about how hard it is to raise a child in a hostile environment. She stared at me while folding laundry as if waiting for me to snap. But I didn't. Because every time she baited me, I pictured that stack of folders in Holt's office. I thought of the scanned documents, the notarized deed, the refinance records, the photo I had of her forged eviction notice. I had turned every insult, every slight, every lie she planted into evidence. And I wasn't just playing defense anymore. I was building a case. One morning, I received a call from Holt's assistant. The official file had been prepared. Everything we had compiled was now stored in 3 secure locations. One at his office, one at my bank's safety deposit box, and one at my home hidden beneath the floorboard of my closet. Each binder clearly labeled tabbed and ready to be submitted to court at a moment's notice. We were ready. And Madison, despite her smiles and casual cruelty, had no idea the ground beneath her was starting to crack. Because the moment she slid that fake eviction letter under my door, she'd crossed from emotional manipulation into legal warfare. And in that arena, truth doesn't blink. Truth doesn't shake. Truth just waits for the right moment to rise. A belly full of lies. Grief changes the way you listen. After a certain point, it's not about what people say, it's about what they don't. The way their voice tightens when they lie. The way their eyes shift when they're calculating. And I had spent the last 2 weeks listening more than I spoke, because silence had become my strongest weapon. And in that silence, I'd gathered everything I needed. Legal documents, scanned evidence, witnesses, a rock-solid deed, all safely tucked away with Mr. Holt, my lawyer, who now referred to my case as not just a civil dispute, but a fraud in progress. But what I wasn't prepared for was what Madison tried next. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind that started quiet and unremarkable. I walked into the kitchen expecting another round of cold politeness. Instead, I heard it first, the faint, rhythmic sniffling of someone trying just hard enough to be overheard. There she was standing by the sink in a pale robe tissue, in hand eyes, misty like she'd just finished crying or was rehearsing for an audience I waited. Let her speak first. When she turned around and saw me, she did what any manipulator does when their plan is about to unfold. She softened. Tilted her head slightly, wiped beneath her eyes with a slow, trembling motion that didn't quite match the sparkle of calculation I saw underneath. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "It just hits me sometimes, all over again." I nodded once, but didn't respond. Then came the performance. She placed her hand gently over her stomach, not dramatic subtle. Like an actress in a final scene. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure she said barely above a whisper, "I'm pregnant." "Ellen?" Time stopped. I stood there trying not to blink too fast, not to react, because every instinct inside me screamed, something doesn't add up. Aaron had been dead for 10 weeks. I took a step forward, slow and steady. "How far along?" I asked. She paused, then answered too quickly. 8 weeks, maybe 9. And that was it. That single sentence unraveled the thread. Because it didn't fit. It couldn't. She wasn't carrying Aaron's child. And deep down, I think, she knew, I knew. But she wasn't done yet. She pulled a folded sonogram photo from a drawer and laid it on the table like a trump card. A clean black and white image with her name, a clinic label, and a printed date. Just 4 weeks prior. Not 8. Not 9. 4. She saw me staring and quickly followed up with, "I used a donor. Aaron and I had talked about it just in case. He wanted me to have a piece of him. It was all rehearsed, delivered with perfect pacing. Just enough tremble in the voice, just enough eye contact to make it feel real. But it wasn't. And I knew it. Aaron never would have kept that from me, not something like this. We talked about everything. Life insurance, house repairs, even the name he wanted. If he ever had a daughter, there was no way he'd leave me in the dark about something so personal, so irreversible. But Madison wasn't just trying to fake a pregnancy, she was trying to weaponize it. She was building a story, a courtroom narrative, a media headline if it came to that. Grieving widow expecting child emotionally harassed by mother-in-law. She was counting on the world seeing her belly and assuming she was the only one worth protecting. And I realized right then, this wasn't about motherhood. It was about control. I kept my face still, my voice level. "I see," I said, handing the sonogram back like it was a takeout menu. She looked relieved, even a little smug. She thought I had folded, that I had bought the lie. But as soon as she left the room, I pulled out my phone and compared the date on the sonogram with the document I had photographed from her tote bag the night before. The one labeled "Doc Copies, Backup Plan." The dates were just 4 days apart. Same clinic label, same week. 2 props from the same performance. I sent both images to Mr. Holt with a simple message. "We need to talk." He called me within an hour. "This actually helps us," he said. "If she's claiming emotional hardship or dependency, we can legally request full medical records. If the dates don't match, if she can't prove continuity, it's not just a lie. It's fraud. What if she faked the whole thing?" I asked. "Then it becomes prosecutable," he replied, "but only if you stay quiet, keep documenting, don't engage." And I did exactly that. I let Madison play her role. I nodded politely when she said things like, "This baby is going to need space," or "It'll be hard raising a child in a hostile environment." Each word was a hook, a trap, a setup for an outburst, but I gave her nothing. She didn't understand yet. I wasn't a grieving mother. I was a chess player, and she had just sacrificed her queen. 2 days later, she made her next move. An envelope slid under my door marked "Urgent." 48-hour notice. Inside was a typed eviction notice. No court stamp, no attorney signature, just empty threats wrapped in legal language. And the final blow, a line claiming I was unstable, and she feared for her safety and that of her unborn child. She was now using a child that didn't exist to try and erase me. But what she didn't realize was that every lie, every forged photo, every whisper she thought was private, I had turned into documented timestamped truth. And the law? It doesn't blink. It doesn't panic. It just waits until the moment it strikes back. The signature that changed everything. There are moments when you feel the floor shift under your feet, not because of fear, but because of clarity. Cold, irreversible clarity. I'd felt that shift once already, when Madison stood in Aaron's funeral clothes and whispered, "You have a week to get out." But nothing compared to what came next. Nothing compared to discovering what she had really done. It happened late at night. Madison had just finished hosting what she called a grief gathering, a wine and finger food mixer for Aaron's coworkers and Pilates friends. Not a memorial, not a moment of reverence. A cocktail party in the house where my son had taken his last breath. I'd stayed silent. I watched her float through the living room, pouring wine like it was a celebration. I listened to the guests repeat words she fed them. So strong. Such grace. Aaron would be proud. They didn't know she had gutted his study, boxed up his military plaques, replaced his recliner with a showroom chair. But I knew I saw it all. That night after the guests left and the house returned to a tense, artificial quiet, I passed the guest room and saw something that stopped me cold. A tote bag, slightly unzipped, with the edge of a manila folder poking out. I stepped closer and read the label in black ink. Doc copies. Backup plan. I didn't touch anything. Not yet. I stepped back into my room, grabbed my phone, and returned. I leaned in, careful not to disturb anything, and snapped a photo through the door. Later, once she was in the shower singing, humming, always so sure of her performance, I opened the bag. Inside were multiple folders. One labeled House Timeline, another E-Signatures 2023. I flipped them open and photographed everything I saw. There among the paperwork was a digital image of a last will and testament. It listed Madison as the sole heir, the sole property owner. My name wasn't mentioned once. At the bottom of the document was a signature. It was supposed to be Aaron's. But it wasn't. I knew his handwriting. Every letter, every stroke. This wasn't it. The notary seal on the PDF had been copied and pasted, pixelated and slightly blurred. The file metadata showed the document had been created on March 4th. Aaron died on February 2nd. And in the bottom corner of the screen, the author field didn't say Aaron K. It said, Madison K. Drafts. I stood there, my heart pounding, staring at the screen. Not angry, not devastated, but sharpened. Because now this wasn't just about pushing me out of a home. This was about rewriting my son's death. I forwarded the screenshots to Mr. Holt with a single line. She forged his will. He called before sunrise. His voice wasn't surprised, but it was serious. We're filing today, he said. She's moved from civil aggression into criminal territory. Within hours, he had drafted motions to freeze the property title to prevent any unauthorized sale, flag the forged will for court review and fraud investigation, place a protective injunction against further manipulation of the estate. I didn't have to serve her myself. The court would. By noon, I had printed 3 full binders of every document we'd collected. The scanned deed with my name, the refinance agreement with only me and Aaron, the fake eviction notice, the sonogram with suspicious dates, screenshots of her forged will, and a list of guests who heard her lie about owning the house. I labeled one binder case file, Madison, and stored it under the floorboard of my closet. Another went to Holt's office. The third to my safety deposit box, and that evening, I came home to find Madison on a video call, laughing about a real estate opportunity. I'll have access to the property in 2 weeks. Tops, she told the screen. Confident, she didn't know that the timeline had already crumbled beneath her. I walked into the room. Didn't say a word, just made sure she saw me. She ended the call quickly. Do you need something? She asked, a little too casual. Just a heads up, I said calmly. If another envelope comes to my door, make sure it's court-stamped. Anything less goes straight to my attorney." She blinked fast, like I'd slapped her. "Are you threatening me?" she hissed. I smiled. "You started the paperwork war, Madison. I'm just keeping mine legal." And I walked out, leaving her to stew in her own paranoia. That night, I did one final thing. I logged into Aaron's old email. The password still worked, his favorite song lyric, and his service number. He'd shared it with me once when I helped him job hunt inside in a flagged folder called Estate. I found it, a PDF labeled Draft Will, Feb 2023. It matched the one from Madison's bag, same format, same wording. But this version had clear metadata created on her laptop, not his. And the signature, still fake, the seal, still pasted. I printed it, backed it up, and added it to the file. The next morning, Holt called me before I finished my coffee. "We're shifting into litigation mode," he said. "We now have evidence of document forgery, misrepresentation of property ownership, and manipulation of estate records." I didn't smile out of victory. I didn't even feel joy. I felt still, like I had finally pulled the last mask off a woman who thought she could steal everything and walk away untouched. Now the courts would see her. Now the law would speak. And for the first time since my son's death, I wasn't just defending myself. I was fighting to expose the lie she built, and I had the truth on my side. The day the truth stood up. It wasn't the kind of victory that makes you want to cheer. It was the kind that leaves you quiet, the kind that settles deep in your bones, not with noise, but with a calm that only comes after a storm you thought would never end. The courtroom was cold that morning, not physically, but emotionally. Still formal, heavy with silence. The type of place where lies crack under the weight of paperwork, where stories are replaced by signatures, where performance ends and the truth has no more room to hide. Madison walked in wearing a cream blazer heels too high for someone supposedly grieving. Her hair was perfect, her posture flawless. In her hand, she carried a folded sonogram photo like it was a shield, a final prop. Her lawyer was younger than I expected, all smiles and soft tones, trying to paint her as the image of fragile widowhood. "She's endured loss," he began, "and now faces emotional instability in her own home." I said nothing. I didn't need to, because Mr. Holt stood up and presented a file so thick it made the judge pause. Inside was everything. The original deed dated and notarized with my name and Aaron's side by side. The refinance agreement from less than a year ago. Again, no trace of Madison A. Forensic breakdown of the forged eviction letter, complete with typographic mismatches and metadata inconsistencies. Side-by-side comparisons of Aaron's real signature, and the one Madison submitted on her fake will, an obvious, careless forgery. And finally, a digital forensic report showing the will was created on a laptop registered to Madison K., not Aaron. The judge didn't ask for drama. She didn't need tears or shouting. She needed one thing, legal clarity. And Holt gave it to her, line by line, page by page. At one point, Madison interrupted, claiming context was missing, that Aaron had always said the house would be hers someday. But her voice trembled, not with grief, but exposure. The judge raised a hand. "Let's be clear," she said. "Did the decedent ever submit a legally recognized will that excluded the co-owner?" No, Holt answered. In fact, the only existing notarized deed includes my client. And the will, the judge asked. Holt opened the final folder, laid it flat, and tapped the metadata field, created on a non-decedent device. After his death, using a falsified signature and recycled notary seal. Madison's lawyer went silent, and in that moment, Madison stopped being a widow in the court's eyes. She became a suspect. The judge took a long breath and said what I'd been waiting to hear for weeks. The deed confirms shared legal ownership between the plaintiff and the deceased. The defendant has no lawful authority to issue eviction. All claims of sole inheritance are void pending a fraud investigation into the submitted will. As of today, the plaintiff retains co-ownership, and the property is legally protected from further unilateral action. The gavel didn't slam. It didn't need to, because the silence that followed was louder than any verdict. Madison didn't look at me as we left the courtroom. Her shoulders had collapsed inwards, her face pale. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper something urgent, but her hands just trembled. And I walked out with nothing but my purse and my dignity. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. Because this wasn't a victory lap. It was the law catching up with the truth. In the car, Holt turned to me and said, "Now we wait. She'll either push back or she'll start packing." I looked out the window, the sun slicing through the clouds, and said, "She won't fight. She's lost the narrative." And I was right. That afternoon, I got the court email, full ownership recognition status confirmed. One line. But it felt like breathing for the first time in months. When I walked into the kitchen later that day, Madison was already there, dressed in black, sipping coffee from a mug that didn't belong to her. A legal pad sat on the table in front of her, covered in phone numbers and crossed out names. She didn't look up, just said, "You think you've won." I poured my coffee calmly. Then I said, "No, I think the law finally spoke." She stood up so fast, her chair scraped the tile. "You don't get to steal everything from me." I met her eyes. Steady cold. "You tried to erase me from a house I helped build, from a son I raised, and you did it with a fake will, a fake pregnancy, and a real hunger for control. You're not the victim here." She opened her mouth to argue, to cry, to manipulate. But nothing came out. And then I said, the one thing I'd never been able to say before, not to her, not even to myself. "Pack your things. I'm giving you the respect you never gave me. I'm not calling the sheriff yet." She stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard that a frame fell from the hallway wall. I didn't flinch. I just picked it up, reset it, and boiled pasta for dinner. And that night, for the first time in what felt like eternity, I slept with the window open. No door wedge, no backup key under my pillow, no need to check for footsteps in the hall. The house was still. The fear was gone. And everything Madison had tried to take from my name, to my legacy, to my son's memory, was now mine again. Not because I shouted, but because I endured. Because I stood. Because I stayed silent long enough to let the truth speak for me. The last word was mine. The house was too quiet the next morning. Not peaceful charged, like the air just before a storm breaks, thick with tension and unspoken things. When I stepped into the kitchen, Madison was already there, dressed in all black again, like she was headed to another funeral. She sat at the dining table, a cup of untouched coffee in front of her, and a legal pad filled with scribbled names and crossed-out phone numbers. Her lips were tight, her eyes empty. She didn't look up when I entered. Just said, "You think you've won?" I didn't answer right away. I poured my coffee, slowly, placed the kettle back on the stove, and let the silence stretch until she had to sit with her own words. Then I turned and said quietly, "No, I think the truth finally caught up with you." That broke something. She slammed her hand down on the table, knocking the coffee off balance. "You don't get to steal everything from me." I met her eyes, unwavering. "I didn't steal anything. I kept what was mine. You're the one who tried to rewrite the past with fake documents, a staged pregnancy and a forged will." Her face twisted, trying to pull another mask over her rage. But it wouldn't stick. Not anymore. The act was dead. The courtroom had killed it. The gavel had shattered the fantasy she built, and now all she had left was fury. "I was grieving," she whispered. "No," I said. "You were scheming." She froze. And in that pause, I saw the truth hit her, Hard, sharp, unavoidable. She wasn't in control anymore. The story was no longer hers to tell. I stepped closer and added, "Pack your things. I'm giving you more respect than you ever gave me. I'm not calling the sheriff yet." Her mouth opened like she wanted to scream, but nothing came out. She grabbed her phone and stormed out the front door. I didn't follow. I didn't gloat. I just sat down at the kitchen table, wrapped my hands around the warm mug, and for the first time in months, tasted my coffee without fear in my throat. Hours passed. The house stayed still. She didn't return until late evening, her car pulling up with a slam of the brakes. Inside, I heard the rustling of boxes, cardboard, scraping tape, tearing. She was finally packing. But she didn't do it quietly. No, she wanted to be heard, wanted to be the victim until the very end. She brought 2 friends over the next afternoon, and I stayed in my room while they whispered in the hallway. "She's insane." One said, "I can't believe you lived with her," said the other. I didn't respond. Those weren't questions worth answering. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. The court had done that for me, but she wasn't quite finished. The next morning, she tried one last pathetic move, calling Aaron's old friend Kyle. Left him a voicemail claiming I'd fabricated the entire case, that Aaron never wanted me in the house, that I was manipulating the system using elder abuse tactics. But what she didn't know was Kyle had already spoken to me. He had seen the court documents. He had read Aaron's letter. He forwarded the voicemail to me with just one text. "She's desperate." And he was right. By Thursday, her car was fully packed. The boxes were lined along the hallway, some labeled, some not, some so hastily taped, they barely held together. It wasn't a graceful exit. It was a retreat. She stood at the door that morning with her last bag in hand. Her makeup was smudged, her voice raw. "You don't have to do this," she said. I looked her straight in the eye. "Neither did you." She flinched like she'd expected me to yell, to cry, to give her something dramatic she could twist into another sob story. But I didn't. I stood there, calm, still, unmovable. Then I said, "You have until midnight." Her eyes narrowed. "Where am I supposed to go? Anywhere that isn't here?" I said. And I closed the door, not out of cruelty, out of finality. I watched from the window as she stood there frozen on the porch like she didn't know where to go, now that the house, the story, and the power no longer belonged to her. She eventually walked to the car, slammed the trunk, drove off without looking back, and I didn't cry, I didn't cheer, I just felt done. That night, the silence in the house wasn't suffocating anymore. It was whole. Still, for the first time in months, I didn't check the lock twice. I didn't listen for footsteps in the hallway. I just let the quiet settle around me like a warm blanket. And that would have been the end until I walked into the living room and saw it. A silver flash drive left on the coffee table. Unlabeled bait. I stared at it for a long time. I knew Madison. She never left anything behind unless she wanted it to be found. At first, I thought about throwing it out, ignoring it. But I couldn't let this story end with a loose thread. So I plugged it into Aaron's old laptop, the one she never touched because she said it smelled like dust and grief. One folder. One file. "Open me." It was a video. Madison sat in Aaron's office chair, looking directly into the camera. Her face calm, her voice almost kind. "If you're watching this, then I'm either gone or you think you've won," she said. She went on about how I had overstayed my welcome, how Aaron wanted me gone, how she had done what needed to be done. It was one final attempt to twist the knife, to take the one thing she hadn't touched, my bond with Aaron. But what she didn't know was that I already had the only proof I'd ever need. Aaron's handwritten letter tucked safely in my drawer, dated weeks before his death, apologizing, explaining warning. This house was always ours, not hers. Do what you have to do, Mom. So I closed the video, ejected the flash drive, and threw it in the trash. Not out of fear, out of peace. Because I didn't need reminders anymore. The war was over, and every room in that house was finally mine again. The house remembered me. The morning after Madison left, the silence wasn't heavy. It was full. Not the kind of silence that follows an argument or fills the gap after someone slams a door. It was the kind that feels earned. The kind that feels like breath, returning to your chest after months of holding it. The house had changed, not in any way someone else might notice, but I felt it. The energy, the stillness, the weight of Madison's presence had finally lifted, like someone had cut a cord I hadn't even realized was wrapped around my throat. I walked through each room that morning with a mug of hot tea in my hand, just looking, not inspecting, not checking for damage, just standing in the space like I belonged there, because I did. In the living room, I pulled Erin's photo from the drawer where she had stuffed it and placed it back on the shelf near the entryway. He was smiling in that photo, sun hitting his shoulders just right, one arm around me on a hiking trail he loved. I ran my thumb along the frame, whispering quietly, "You're home again." I lit a candle in the kitchen, lavender and cedar. The scent, he always said, reminded him of safety. I let it burn while I folded the last of the towels she had left behind, wiping her fingerprints off my life one corner at a time. And then in the quiet of that golden-lit morning, I opened the drawer I had avoided since the funeral. The top drawer of Erin's nightstand inside was a folded sheet of paper, aged just enough to feel intentional. It was his handwriting. I knew it before I even opened it. At the top it said, "If anything happens to me, I need you to know, I'm sorry." My hands started to tremble. Line by line, it poured out of him. Guilt, regret, worry. He wrote about how isolated Madison had made him feel, how he knew she was manipulative, but he was trying to fix it, how torn he felt between the woman he married and the mother who had always been there. And near the bottom, in uneven emotional script, he wrote, "Don't let her take everything. This house was always ours, not hers. Do what you have to do. Mom." Tears rolled down my cheeks. Not the desperate kind. Not grief. Something deeper. Relief. Validation. A confirmation from beyond that I had never been wrong to fight. That I hadn't imagined the coldness. That he saw it too. That in his final weeks, he knew I was the one person who would protect his memory, even if it meant going to war in his name. I scanned the letter, backed it up, and placed the original beside the deed in the folder labeled Erin's Legacy. And just like that, the house felt whole again. The porch he built was mine. The kitchen I stocked was mine. The hallway, lined with sunlight and shadows, was mine. Not because a judge said so, but because every inch of this home had held my grief, my fight, and now my peace. By sunset, the house was still. I didn't check for footsteps. I didn't sleep with a door wedge. I didn't tiptoe down the hallway or brace for confrontation. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the porch. Madison once tried to claim as hers. I watched the streetlights flicker on. I listened to the hum of summer air, and I whispered not to her, but to myself. My house, my rules, because I wasn't just living here anymore. I was free here. Free from her voice echoing in the hallway, free from forged signatures and stolen heirlooms, free from the quiet, constant battle for proof, free from pretending that I was only surviving. That night, I made myself dinner. Real dinner. Not the frozen things I ate between stress and court filings. I roasted vegetables the way Erin liked. I set the table for one, and I didn't feel alone. I felt present. And that's something Madison never understood. Power isn't just in documents or legal rulings. It isn't in control or manipulation. It's in the ability to breathe fully in your own space, to sit without fear, to exist without needing someone to validate your presence. Before bed, I cleaned out the last of the boxes she had labeled. Mom's stuff. I unpacked them one by one, setting each item where it belonged. Framed photos. My recipe books. A crocheted blanket. Aaron made for me one winter when he was learning to slow down. I placed everything back, like I was restoring a broken memory piece by piece. The last box held my wedding ring. I hadn't seen it since the week Aaron died. I slipped it on, not out of nostalgia, but defiance. She thought she could erase my life, but I had rebuilt it, not with vengeance, with truth. And when I climbed into bed, I didn't clutch a folder or check my phone for evidence. I simply slept. The next morning, I made tea. And I didn't rush it. I let it steep. I let the air fill with calm, because the war was over. The house remembered me, and I remembered who I was before she tried to make me forget. The flash drive. She left behind. You'd think it would end at the door, that once she drove away, car-packed pride shattered, future undone, that the war would be over, that silence would return like an old friend, wrapping the house in long overdue peace. And for a while it did, until I saw it, a small silver flash drive, sitting dead center on the coffee table like it had been placed there on purpose. No label, no casing, just gleaming metal and quiet menace. Madison never left anything behind by accident. Every move she made was deliberate, calculated, choreographed down to the last breath. This wasn't an oversight. This was a message. For a long time, I didn't move. I just stood there staring at it. My first instinct was to throw it out, to cut the final thread she was trying to pull. But after everything, after the lies, the forged will, the fake pregnancy, the voicemail campaign, I knew better than to ignore the last piece of the story. I plugged it into Erin's old laptop, the one she said smelled like dust and grief, the one she never touched because it reminded her of the part of him she couldn't control. There was only one file. Open me. I clicked. The video was grainy at first, low lighting, poor webcam angle, but unmistakable. Madison sitting in Erin's office chair, staring directly into the camera like it was a mirror. Her expression wasn't angry, it was composed. Calm, like a woman who still thought she could win with the right script. If you're watching this, then I'm either gone or you think you've won. That was her opening line. Delivered not with fire, but with ice. You were never supposed to stay here forever. Ellen, you were a placeholder, a guest who overstayed her welcome. She leaned closer, her voice softening to a whisper. Aaron wanted you to leave. He just didn't have the guts to say it. I told him we could build something if he let go of the past. But he was weak, couldn't cut the cord. So I had to do it for him. Her words were cleanly spoken, no rage, no flinching. But it was the smile that followed that shook me. That slow, proud curve of her lips, like she was proud of it. Like manipulating my son into isolation had been an act of love. And then her final words. You can keep the house. Ellen, but you'll never forget this. The screen went black. I sat there for a long time, not because her words wounded me, not because I questioned what she said, but because I finally understood the core of who she was, not just desperate for power, but desperate to be remembered, even if it meant leaving a scar. But she miscalculated as always. Because I didn't need a flash drive to remember, I already had the only truth that mattered. I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out Aaron's handwritten letter, the one I'd found in his nightstand. The one that began with, "If anything happens to me, I need you to know I'm sorry." He had written about Madison's control, about her lies, about the loneliness she wrapped him in like a prison, about how he was trying to fix it, but didn't know how. And at the end, he had written, "This house was always ours, not hers. Do what you have to do." Mom, that was the truth. Undeniable, unedited, unforged. That was the voice I trusted, not the one on a USB drive filmed like a final monologue. So I ejected the flash drive, deleted the video, tossed the device in the kitchen trash bin with the eggshells and coffee grinds. Not because I was afraid of it, but because I didn't need it anymore. Madison thought she was delivering the last word, but the last word wasn't hers to give. The last word came from the stillness in the house, the silence that no longer felt haunted. It came from Erin's photo back on the entryway shelf, from the lavender candle flickering quietly on the kitchen counter, from the cup of tea I brewed without flinching. That night, I didn't sleep with the hallway light on. I didn't check the locks more than once. I didn't wedge the door shut or press my ear against the wood to listen for footsteps. Instead, I opened the windows, let the breeze roll in, and I slept. Deep, dreamless, undisturbed. Because the real war had never been about legal ownership. It had been about emotional possession, about fear, about control, about rewriting history with enough fake sympathy to make it believable. Madison failed, not because I outmaneuvered her, but because I refused to doubt the truth. I already knew that I was never a guest here, that my son never turned his back on me, that I had always belonged in this home. When I woke the next morning, I finished unpacking the last box labeled Mom's Stuff. I put the family cookbook back in the kitchen drawer, hung the framed needlepoint Erin made in college back in the hallway, and I left the front door open for a while. Not because I expected anyone, but because I wasn't hiding anymore. I looked out across the porch. She once tried to claim and whispered, "Not for drama, not for victory, just for myself. You were wrong. I'm still here." And the wind carried it off like a prayer that needed no answer. 'Cause some stories don't end in courtroom battles or emotional breakdowns. Some end in stillness. In a woman standing in her home surrounded by peace. Knowing she didn't just survive the fire, she stepped out of it. Whole in life, not every battle is loud. Some of the most important wars we fight are waged in silence inside our homes, behind closed doors, and within ourselves. The story of a mother defending her home after the death of her son isn't just about legal drama or family betrayal. It's about reclaiming your voice, your boundaries, and your truth in a world that often tries to take them from you. One of the most powerful lessons this story teaches is that silence is not weakness. In fact, when used wisely, silence becomes a weapon, confusing those who expect emotional chaos and giving you the space to observe, to plan, and to act with precision. The narrator never fought fire with fire. She never screamed or begged. She documented everything, trusted the law, and allowed the truth to do the talking. That kind of emotional discipline is rare, but it's exactly what protects you from those who thrive on control and manipulation. In today's world, where gaslighting and fake narratives are common, having proof, written, photographed, or signed isn't just smart. It's necessary. When you feel like someone is trying to rewrite your story, your best defense isn't outrage. It's clarity. It's documentation. It's knowing the truth so well that you never need to defend it with volume. Another lesson this story underscores is the importance of seeing people clearly. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. Madison's actions were layered in false kindness and social performance, but her intent was visible from the beginning. Too many of us excuse bad behavior because it's uncomfortable to confront. But if someone consistently undermines your value, rewrites the truth, or seeks control over your space emotionally or physically, you owe it to yourself to set boundaries, not excuses. And perhaps the most empowering takeaway is this: you don't have to fight loudly to win. Real strength is found in restraint, in preparation, in knowing when not to engage. The narrator didn't just protect a house, she protected her peace, her legacy, and her self-respect. And in the end, she didn't just survive, she stood tall, whole, and unshaken. That's what real victory looks like. It's not about revenge, it's about dignity. So whatever storm you face, whether it's betrayal, legal injustice, or emotional manipulation, remember this: you have the right to protect your truth. You have the power to stand in silence. And you are never powerless when you stop allowing others to write your story for you.